Well, good morning. We got a lot of people out with sickness and traveling and everything else. And Connie's cousin sent us some pictures this morning. They're in Illinois, and they went to sunrise service at the Lincoln Memorial. And I had never really heard of it, so it's a big deal, I guess. So I went online to check it out, and they got a whole big website of everything. And they had a section on frequently asked questions. And that one had to do with religion. More about how much does it cost, and where to park, and if you have wheelchairs you can pay in advance to set up front, all kinds of stuff like that. I think they missed the point, but so it doesn't even tell who the minister is, whoever. There's no info on the important part.
Church of Christ service or something?
Oh no, it's not.
What they call it?
It's national.
What they call it?
It's called the National Community Church.
Yeah. Well, I
Puts
think
it on.
ecumenical is the term they use whenever they kind of get somebody who's not really affiliated.
Yeah, and I don't.
So community church.
It looked cool though.
Yeah.
It did look cool, but just so they get fed, I guess, the proper thing. Excuse me. Today we're continuing in Peter. Last week we left off the first couple of verses. Peter, we spent some time talking of chapter 2, 1 Peter chapter 2. We talked about the pure spiritual milk and us desiring the gospel. And we really need to, I don't know what the right term would actually be, but in my mind it would be, we need to program ourselves so that we are desiring Christ. We are desiring His gospel. It needs to be something that we put at the forefront of our thought process.
Mindset.
Our mindset. Of course, Ephesians says, set your minds on things above. And we need to constantly work at that, because we're just so distracted by this world and the things in it that if we don't make a conscious effort, we'll get distracted. Isn't that what Peter's trying to do here with the congregations? Man, I might lose my voice this morning.
We do what we determine we're going to do.
Exactly.
So that's just the way it is. And so it doesn't happen accidentally. And so whatever you determine to be your priority, that's going to be what it is.
Exactly.
And, people, I think, sometimes get the idea that it's going to fall in their lap accidentally, or that they're going to wake up one morning and be hungering and thirsting after the word, and that's not how it works. You have to make up your mind.
And if you've ever talked with people that either been a Christian or said they were Christian, they always talk about, well, I got, things of the world drew me away, and that's an honest evaluation. However, think about this for a minute. We do have stuff in this world that draws us away. But think about the early church here. They could have been killed had they been caught assembling. We don't have that kind of distraction. And you ever ask yourself, would you still assemble? Or would you come up with I'm going to do it in the closet of my house and justify it that way? But the Lord tells us to come together, right? We need to understand that no matter what happens in this world, it doesn't really matter if we lose our soul. If we lose our soul because we're not focused on God, who cares? Nothing else matters, does it? That's the most important thing in our life. And that's what Peter's getting them to understand. Yeah, we're under pressure. We got all these things going on, but we need to desire this milk.
A few years ago, there's some story that went around, some China, the guy hid a Bible in his gutter or something, and he got busted. I guess in China, you can't even have a Bible.
Right.
It's really rough over there, where you can take consequences.
Right. Or in North Korea, you can't have, I think it's North Korea, which one's a bad one, I can't remember.
North.
Yeah, North Korea, they tell you what you can eat. You can't even drink a Coke over there,
So there still are people that get threatened.
or in that situation, and are trying to hide, or trying to leave, yeah.
Well, we're not under the threat of death, but it wasn't too many years ago, a couple of years ago, that the government tried to see what they could push us to do as far as allowing us to assemble.
Yeah.
You know, they used the pandemic as the reason why we couldn't. And different congregations handled it different ways, but I know there were some that chose to just stop assembling because the government said, the health department or whoever said,
Right.
you can't have more than so many people together. And I know there were churches that said, well, the health department said we can, so we can.
Right,
And they let the government tell them what, not that
Dictate.
there wasn't some, for a period, there was some things to be worried about until we figured out
right.
what was really going on.
Well, yeah,
But then there were some that just continued to not assemble because, well, a government agency said we can't have that many people together.
right.
And so they were testing us to see
They were.
what can we make them do. And so we need to be cautious that just because we don't face that today doesn't mean tomorrow we won't face a government telling us you can't assemble.
Exactly.
And what will we do?
Yeah, how would we react to it?
So my brother lives in Pacifica, California, and they wouldn't let them assemble in the building, so they set a PA system out in the parking lot. And they held services, the neighbors could hear it.
So they did that at Linda Road too.
They did that, yeah, so that takes thinking and guts to do that.
Right.
Well, and see, as we know now, a lot of that was just the government trying to see how far they could push.
Yeah.
You know, my two sisters live in California, or one does now, down to only one there. And during all this, they were even telling people, there was a mandate that Newsom put out that said, you can't have any more than 8 people in your home during Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Wow.
See, the problem is, they will, like Andrew is pointing out, this world, Satan is going to use every little thing to see how far we can be pushed. There was even ministers that got jailed because large congregations, and they continued to meet. But too many times we get afraid, and the least little thing we use as an excuse to stop obeying what we're supposed to be doing. And here, these people are their threat of life. And it was a real thing. It wasn't like, hey, we're going to. It's, we will if we catch you. And so we need to put ourselves in a position that we need to desire that gospel to the point, and we need to understand that there's no option other than doing what God wants, even if it means our life. And that's what Peter's getting across to them. We also talked last week about Christ being a living stone and rejected by men. And it says here in verse 4 of chapter 2, excuse me, as you come to him, a living stone, rejected by men, but in the sight of God, chosen and precious. I want to make a point of that. We're to come to God as a living stone. And he calls us here chosen and precious. He also calls, Christ also refers to himself as chosen and precious. Isn't that kind of a cool scenario to think about, how important we are to him? And we know all throughout the Old Testament it talks about the living stone. And we talked last week about we serve a living God. We don't worship an idol, a man-made product that is not living. Where I used to live, there was a donut shop that had a Buddha in it. And it was about that big. And he had all this fancy stuff around him, and he's like in a throne, sitting there. And they would always give him the first donuts every morning. Now, I never seen him eat it. He looked like he'd eaten them, but I never seen him eat them. And then they would give him oranges, and they would go through, they would buy a bag of oranges. I knew the owners. And they would go through and find the best looking two. And that would be given to Buddha. And it would sit there till it goes bad. We serve a living God. We don't serve an idol that was man-made. And I don't understand it any other way. But we serve a living God, a living stone, solid foundation that we can bank our life on. Because it's going to hold true. And then, so we left off in verse 7. It says, well, we'll go back to verse 6. It says, for it stands in scriptures, here he's quoting Isaiah, behold, I am lying in Zion a stone, a cornerstone, chosen and precious. And whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. So the honor is for you who believes. So the honor, the blessing of obeying and being built on this stone, we have if we're true to him. That's a blessing we have. And look what it says here. But for those who do not believe, the stone that the builders rejected, obviously referencing Christ, has become this cornerstone and a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. And here, the references here is Romans 9:33, Isaiah 28:16, and Romans 9:22. All those are cross-references to what Peter's talking about here. So, as much as the stone, the cornerstone is a blessing to us, it can also be a stumbling stone to those who are not listening to it. So we're going to look, you find where I'm at here. Let's go over to, let me see. Let's go over to John 15, John chapter 15. And we're going to start 18 through 25. Let's see, I think that's where I want to be. And this is talking about this stone that was rejected by man. It says that Jesus is talking to the disciples here. He says to the apostles, if the world hates you, know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. So let's pause right there before we read the rest. Jesus saying, the world hates me first. And why did they hate him? Why did they reject the stone, as we're reading in 1 Peter? Why was that stone rejected?
Because it was a physical king.
Wasn't what they wanted, was it? It didn't meet their criteria. Doesn't that sound ridiculous? Here, let me draw out what I want in a Savior. Me, who's imperfect. It's going to have flaws, isn't it? So, it wasn't what they wanted, so they rejected him. So he's now telling us too, as Peter's telling them, look, they hated Jesus, they're hating us. That's why they're persecuting us. They don't agree with us. Can you imagine? You think about, well, today people are focusing on the crucifixion of Christ. Think about this for a minute. During that time, you've seen everything Jesus goes through, the people of the time, at the time. They watched the things that happened. He was hung on a cross. They heard the words that he said, Father, forgive them. And as he died, what happened? The earth shook. The sky got dark. Had that ever happened before when somebody was hanging on a cross and died? Would that not have scared you? People rose from the graves? What kind of person would it take now to not believe that there's something miraculous about that person? If I'd have seen that, trust me, I'd have been scared. What kind of person does it take to not believe that? Yet afterwards, they're going right back, persecuting the disciples now. And we do that in this world, don't we? Right now, we were talking just a few minutes ago, you know, how over the years they've taken stuff like the Ten Commandments out of courthouse. They won't let kids pray in school. You can't even bring a Bible. If you bring a Bible, that could be offensive to somebody. You see all this pressure. Now, we don't have to worry about physical death, but if kids are being raised where they can't even pray or bring a Bible, if they're not getting the right teachings at home, that's the same death that these people are, or even worse, isn't it? That they were looking at. Does that make sense? The world is going in the wrong direction. And this is what Jesus is saying. And it says in verse 20, remember the word that I say to you. A servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they keep my word, they will also keep yours. But all these things they will do to you on account of my name, because they do not know him who sent me. If I had not come and spoken to them, they would not have been guilty of sin. But now they have no excuse for their sin. So that goes right back to what Peter's talking about as a stumbling stone to those who are not going to obey. He said, because I came, they're not listening. So now they're sinning. Now the stone, our foundation stone, has become a stumbling block to those who will not listen because they're not building on it. I was thinking about twice this week, this came to mind. My wife loves rocks. Don't ask me why. We have them all over the place. But she found this rock, it's about so big. And she decided that a corner by our sidewalk going into my garage would be the great place for this rock. Now it's been there quite a long time. However, at least once a week I trip over it. Now I don't fall, I catch myself, thank goodness. And I keep thinking I'm gonna move that stupid rock. And then I was thinking about this scripture. See, nothing is built on that. So it's only this high. So if I'm carrying something, I cut that corner too tight. And I trip. Isn't that what he's talking about here? If you're not building your life on that cornerstone, it becomes a stumbling block. One of these days, I'm probably not going to catch myself, and that's when I'll get to move it. But we need to build on that cornerstone so it isn't a stumbling block to us. So back in 1 Peter, it says, and then at the end of verse 8, it says, they stumble because they disobey the word, as they were destined to do. But you who are a chosen race, look at this. He calls us what here? What are we called?
A chosen race.
Before, right after that. Anybody say something different than a royal priesthood?
Holy priesthood.
A holy priesthood? What does that mean? What do you, when you think of that holy priesthood, what is that, or royal priesthood, depends on what version you have. What do you think of?
One thing is, under the Old Testament, the priest offered sacrifices and did that. Under the New, we are overall
Exactly.
priesthood. We can offer sacrifice and prayer
Right.
to God.
See-
Back then, only the high priest
Could go in there.
approach the throne of God, and we can all.
Exactly.
approach the throne of God.
And that's the reference that they're talking about here. And that's just where these people could understand. Back in the day, the priests had privileges the regular people didn't have. Today, we get to go directly to Jesus and through him to God. We don't need any other earthly beings. We are the priesthood. When you're looking at that language, we don't use that term anymore, but in effect, that's what we are. We are that royal priesthood.
One time, Moses was the only one who could go on Mount Sinai to actually, everybody had to stay at the foot of the hill.
Right, of the
But
mountain.
Moses had to go up and say, what do I do? How
Right.
do I do this? What do I do?
And now we get that direct contact through God. So you look how encouraging verse 9 is. You are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. Means we are set apart. A people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellence of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. We were called out of darkness. For what purpose? What purpose does it say there? We are his own possessions.
To proclaim his excellencies.
Exactly. To proclaim his excellence. That's what we're to do. Isn't that what we're doing? We're spreading the gospel? Yeah, buddy.
And this is sort of similar to the Jews were the elect or select
Right.
people. Now the church, so this is taking that selectiveness away from the Jews, and putting it on the Christians.
Right?
I love the words that David prayed after his faux with Bathsheba in Psalm 51, verse 12. And he said, restore to me the joy of your salvation and sustain me with a willing spirit. Then I will teach transgressors your ways, and sinners will be converted to you. So it's the importance of that forgiveness and that, response of repenting that gives us that ability. Once we do that, then we can go and proclaim his excellencies.
And when we think about that, the terminology also Peter's using, some of yours might say something different, but we are his possession. Remember earlier up in 1 and 18, we were ransomed. So he paid for us with his blood. So we're his possession. When we put him on, we are his possession. And we have an obligation to proclaim his excellence. What an awesome thing. You think about, in these few verses, what a plateau we got put on for God. He chose us. Do you remember when you were young back in school getting chosen to play on a sport? And then you ever been the last person to get chosen? How good that felt?
Yes.
But Christ chose us first. He chose us. And all we got to do is jump up and get on the team. Too many people would rather stand on the sidelines wondering why they're not making it. Yeah, Jeff.
You know what? We are chosen people, and just like in the Old Testament, the priests were chosen also.
Mm-hmm.
But they had requirements they had to do. I mean, just because you were chosen didn't mean that you didn't have to do anything.
Right.
They had to do everything according to what he said. The same as we. If we are going to be a chosen priesthood, we have to do things according to what he said. We can't just say, well, you know, I'm chosen, so I can do whatever. Those Levites, they couldn't do just whatever. They had to follow a specific order. They had to be obedient. And there's so many today that say, oh yeah, I'm a Christian. Well, they classify themselves as part of the royal priesthood and that, but they're really not doing what he tells them to do.
Right.
You know, they want to have the name, but with that name comes a responsibility to be part of that royal priesthood. To be, you know, the truly chosen ones. Yes, he would like everyone to be saved.
Right.
But there are only going to be a chosen few that are actually going to be followers of him and be obedient.
Because too many people want to be led away by their own thoughts and process.
Exactly.
You know, you think about, during the Old Testament, a lot of times it was instant. You know, you see the guys that were carrying the Ark of the Covenant, it slipped, and the one guy reached up to block it with his hand. See, people don't realize that if we're going to not obey, we're going to perish. We're going to perish. Maybe not today. And then the worst part is that we'll be perishing eternally. And that's what makes it worse. We need to realize how blessed we are to be a chosen person, and how we need to get excited about proclaiming God. Because only when you're excited about something are people going to listen to you. Right? Hey, you ever want to come to church? I'm inviting you. I'll let you know. But sometimes isn't that the way we act? Are you a Christian? Yeah, I'm a Christian. Did you see my t-shirt? I mean, we have that attitude sometimes. Jesus chose us. He calls us a priesthood. We are chosen to be different. We are chosen to proclaim his excellence. Man, what else do you need to get excited? And that's what Peter's telling these people. Look, forget what's going on here. Forget the things you're dealing with that's in this world. You are chosen of God. We will have a home of heaven. If they come today and wipe us out, we're going to have a home with him. Well, we don't have to worry about nothing. And that's the message Peter's getting across there to them. And then look at verse 10. Once you were not a people. Do some of the other translations say that word that differently? I think the King James does.
No people. Verb tense is no people.
No people. You were nothing. Right? It says, but now you are God's people. So we went from nothing to God's people. If go over to Romans chapter 9. Paul brings this out also. Romans chapter 9, let's look at starting at verse 23. It says, actually that whole section, it's kind of hard to pick this out, but it says, in order to make known the riches of his glory for vessels of mercy, which he has prepared beforehand for glory, even us who he has called out, not from the Jews only, but also from the Gentiles, as indeed he says in Hosea, those who were, and you can read that in Hosea chapter 1. It says, those who were not my people, I will call my people. And her who was not beloved, I will call beloved. And he's referencing there the Gentiles, foretelling people who weren't the chosen group. And in this very place where it was said to them, you were not my people, but they will be called sons of the living God. So, how we all understand, or to the best of our ability, how awesome God is. You know, what if your parents said, "You're not my child anymore"? How would you feel? How would you feel? That's a sad thing. But how much sadder is it to have God say, "I don't know you, depart from me. I don't know who you are. You're not a people. You're not my people." What a sad thing. And see, this is the thing that, you see where Peter's going here? Look, we are chosen. We are blessed. But like Jeff said a minute ago, we have certain things we need to do. We need to be obedient to Him. We need to trust in Him. We need to have faith. We need to do what He says by baptizing, compete, and be in complete obedience to the best of our ability. And when we do that, we are His people. When we don't, we are rejecting Him. And He becomes a stumbling stone to us. It couldn't get much plainer. You know, I was reading stuff online, and several ministers throughout said the book of Peter, 1 Peter, you could have a sermon on almost every verse. If you look at it, there's a lot there. You could spend the next couple of years going through 1 Peter, because there's so much there. And that's why it's such a rich book. And that's why that was the reason I said, you know what, this is a good book to go through. Because there is so much here. And if you will follow what Peter's saying in this book, you'll be right with God. Isn't that amazing? And he uses the Old Testament, he uses Paul's writings, all of it's all thrown in here so people understand what he's talking about here. It says, once you were a people, but now you are not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. And again, he ends with another blessing there. What a blessing for God to have mercy on us. Because we can't do it alone. Because we are going to mess up. It says, beloved, in verse 11, I urge you as sojourners. Some of you as sojourners may have pilgrims. What's a sojourner or a pilgrim? Need to know that to understand the rest of this. What's a pilgrim?
Someone was temporarily wandering through and about.
Exactly. It's not just the people who got off the Nina and the Pinta, the Santa Maria. These are people who are moving through temporarily the countryside, Jim.
Mine says aliens and strangers.
Aliens and strangers. See, we sang a song, this world is not my home, I'm just a passing through. My treasures are laid up. Huh?
I was thinking of that song too when you
Yeah.
said
Somewhere beyond the blue, right?
Yeah.
See, that's where our mindset needs to be going. We need to set our mind on that, not on this world. We're just here temporarily. And that's what he's saying here. Remember, guys, no matter what happens here, we're just sojourners. We're just pilgrims. We're just passing through. This is a pathway to get to where we need to go. Excuse me.
Hey, Dan?
Yes, sir.
We're pretty good about worrying about what's going to happen tomorrow or next week or even next month. And I'll be honest, I've had those thoughts, where am I going to live next month? I mean, that's been on my mind lately.
Yeah.
But the reality is if I'm more worried about where I'm going to live eternally, then where the roof over my head is next month doesn't really matter.
It's funny you said that. We got a phone call, me and Connie. Connie hadn't been feeling good. And Thursday morning, we get a phone call from the local CPA who was doing our taxes. And he says, are you sitting down? And I had him on speakerphone. He says, "Are you sitting down?" I said, "Yeah." "Don't you hate that? When someone's doing your taxes and ask you if you're..." He goes, "Well, you're gonna owe around $35,000 this year." I said, "I think you have the wrong number." But he had misread a form and thought that we had got some kind of balloon payment of $150,000. So after I explained it to him and showed him or emailed him the paperwork, it all got straightened out. So we don't owe that kind of money. But I told Connie afterwards. Connie's sitting there having hot flashes. She's not doing so good right at this moment. I said, "Babe," I said, "don't worry about it." I said, "Think about this for a minute. Okay, so we owed $30,000 or whatever amount," he said. He also said we got a balloon payment coming of $150,000. So that means we're going to be $120,000 in the good. So either way, if he's wrong, we win. If he's right, we win. It doesn't matter. And that's how we need to look at this world. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I have that $150,000 or not. It matters in this world, but it doesn't matter, like you were saying, it doesn't matter in the long run. Yes, Janet?
When I got diagnosed with MS, I was so young and it was the end of the world. But as time passed, I began to realize it was a blessing. Because what it makes you do, you quit living for the future. You live for every single day you wake up. And I try to get that when I have friends that have been diagnosed with cancer or something, and I'll say, "I know this is horrible, but it's really a blessing. You're going to quit worrying about things that are not important. Just be glad you have each day."
And that's where I had a friend that was getting in the early stages of dementia. And when he got diagnosed, he went through a couple weeks of rough times. But as it got worse, he would have days where he was really good. And he was telling us one time, he says, "You know what the good thing about this is? I don't remember most of the time all the stuff that I used to bother me." Says most of the time every day is like brand new. So, you know what? This world is going to pass. And we need to focus on Christ. That's the bottom line to what Paul's saying here. It says, we are sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passion of the flesh, which is wages war against your soul. So, we are waging war against these passions of our life. And let's see, where do I have this? In Galatians 5, we've all read this. It's not a new scripture. But what are we waging war against? Galatians chapter 5, we'll look at my notes here. 5:16. But I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the desires of the flesh are against the Spirit, and the desires of the Spirit are against the flesh. For those who are opposed to each other, to keep you from doing the things which you want to do. And then it goes down, it says, but you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. Now the works of the flesh are evident: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, adultery, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like this. I warn you, as I warned you before, those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. These are the things that Peter's warning us against: the war of the flesh, our desires, the things that we are tempted by. And it's all in there. Think about it, it's all in there. But look what let me go back to that. Look what he says here. I was going to make this point that I hadn't noticed before. Some of you may already have. And he lists all these different things. We read a whole bunch of them, right? But then look what he closes with. If you don't fall under all these, look at the last couple of words. And things like these. So not only does he list a whole bunch of things, but he said, and there's more. It's all covered. That anything that's leading you by your own desires away from Christ is these things that we need to wage war against. That Peter says.
Well, what Ephesians 6 says in verse 12. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers and against the powers and against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. It's something we can't see.
Yeah.
And it's insidious. It sneaks into our lives. And so if we're not paying attention, because it's little at a time, and you let down your armor, and
Yeah.
it will get you.
And that's why we need to get our minds focused on the gospel, the milk. Be so desiring that the other stuff doesn't need to come up in our lives. If we don't deal with it, we don't miss it. If we don't have it, we don't miss it. We need to keep our guard up. And he calls it a war. So we need to have our defenses up to counteract the wars, the enemy, the world. Our desires within. The things that we want to put before God. And we don't need to be deceived by that. Don't make excuses. If you mess up, you mess up. Change. Don't be deceived by the things that we justify. Well, I'm better than most of people. Aren't we guilty of that? You know, you hear the term misery loves comfort. Sin also loves comfort. If you can find one person that agrees with you, somehow it makes it better, doesn't it? That's how people do things. They say, well, they're going to go find someone. I knew somebody, a good friend, real good friend of mine, had a major problem back in the 70s. Won't go into it, doesn't matter. And so for about a month or so, every time we were together, I could tell something was wrong. And finally I asked him, I said, come on, come clean, what's going on? He told me what had happened. And I said, well, why didn't you come and tell me? He said, because I knew what you were going to say, and that wasn't what I wanted to hear. And he did what the other people say, and to this day regrets it. It's haunted him his whole life. And see, that's what's going to happen to us. We're not obedient to Christ. It's going to haunt us. It's going to haunt us. If not in this world, in the next. So we need to take this very, very seriously. And then it says, I want to finish this section out. Keep your conduct amongst the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. So he's going back to say that we need to act and walk like a Christian. So even if somebody's trying to slander us, even if somebody's making something up about us because they don't like us for some reason, people are going to see our conduct and say, well, that's not the person I see. And then they can see God in us. What does the day of visitation mean? Anybody have something different in your scriptures, in your Bible? Anybody ever thought of that? What does the day of visitation mean?
When Christ comes again.
Okay? It could be Judgment Day. It could be the day you decide to put Christ on and live your life right also. It's that change, that major change. It's described both ways. But it's the day you decide to either give Christ your life wholly, fully, or the day of judgment. Either way. So we need to keep our conduct pure, Christ-like, until that day. And if we will do that, we will have a home with him. Guaranteed. Thank you. I went over a few minutes, but I wanted to finish that section out.